Hello, this is David. Thank you for checking in for episode three about Kefir or Kefir. I don't know how to say it. I guess I'm going to use both of them in this, but I'll use Kefir for this first segment. If I'm saying it wrong, please forgive me. I'm starting a Kefir culture is very similar to feeding a culture, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. Until then, I want to explain a few things. This culture does best when fed daily and kept cool, but not too cool. You can store it for 2 to 3 weeks in the fridge, but it's a more proactive culture than something like sauerkraut, which just sits for long periods of time. Based off of grains, which are either purchased or given to you from someone who has grown large amounts and has excess. If purchased, these grains can be found in either the dehydrated or live state on Amazon or other suppliers. I have used both, live and dehydrated. I did notice a slight difference in taste, but that may have just been the genetics of the grains or the differences in size of the grains and how they fermented the milk. Kefir grains are similar to sourdough yeast. You can actually create sourdough starters from kefir. I wouldn't suggest using the grains unless you have excess to experiment, but the yogurt-like finished product can be used times before. Typically, if you purchase the grains, you have to feed them and discard the next day's finished product a few times until the grains regain strength, if live, or hydrate if dehydrated. I say finished product in quote because, and if sometimes if you leave, it's just sort of scary if the grains haven't fully um, fermented the milk in a 24-hour period. Leaving milk out sometimes goes bad. But this typically doesn't happen. They just don't want you to um, drink that product until it becomes sort of more gelatinous. You'll know you'll after a couple days, you'll be able to see it. It becomes like yogurt essentially. Um, all the instructions from the seller. If you know someone who gives you fresh grains and you get them the day that they basically fed their culture and they broke off a piece of grain and gave it to you, you should be able to just put it in milk that day and have kefir ready. Yeah. Let me show you the process now of feeding, or it's very similar to starting the grains. And I will come back afterwards to tell you some more important things that I've learned about how to culture the grains. So this is how you feed the kefir culture. What you will need is the culture from yesterday, a bowl, clean jar, a lid for that jar, a little low, but I might add some more after this one just to get the level I need. Optional is a measuring cup, which I don't use because some of the jars I use have measuring on the side, which I prefer. Also, you're going to need a kefir strainer if well, a lot of people use a kefir strainer for the grains. I don't have one because I don't serve it to anybody else. So I just use my fingers to get the grains out. But sanitary wise, I would suggest using a strainer if other people are doing it. And then another optional thing is to have a secondary jar that's clean with a lid and a strainer, just in case you don't want to. Let's say I typically use mine. I make like a cereal out of it. I put things in here. But if you want to save it for later and put it in the refrigerator, you can put it in here. So the way to start is you pour the fermented culture into the bowl. Have a strainer, you would pour it through the strainer before you did what I just did. Um, then I use my fingers, as I said. I feel around for the kefir grain. And this is the grain right here. It is, as you can see, it's broken into one piece, almost two pieces, three pieces now. Uh, and as I've talked about before, it's how it grows. So you drop it in there. And I feel just to make sure that I don't have any more in there. I apologize, that was gross, but I'm doing this from my desk and I can't, not near a sink. I don't want to stop the side here. And I usually do about a cup. I'm going to just do whatever I've got in here today. Get this all wrong. I just pour it in there until I get to. Actually, this is just about a cup. That was perfect. All I do is I put the lid on and I go put it in a cool, dark place and let it sit for another 24 hours. Um, in the funnel, if I were to have it later, I would pour it into another jar. And I'm sorry for looking all this, but it's just the easiest way. Put this in the refrigerator. So as I mentioned before, I'm allowing the culture to sit in a cool, preferably dark place, but I've done it in light before. Definitely helps quite a bit. Probably the best temperature is like 65 degrees, 70. If it gets too warm, as I said, it starts to hurt the culture. Last summer, I killed off that was very healthy. I mean, it was a good size at one point, and it just kept because it got too hot. I had it on top of the refrigerator, and I don't have air conditioning where I was living at the time, and so it started breaking apart into small pieces, getting smaller and smaller. And so I learned that I moved it over to other parts of the place where I was living in order to keep it cooler, but it was too late. Another thing you can do if you've got that same problem, like if it gets really hot in the summer, your like you say, your apartment gets up to your house gets up to 80 degrees. Um, Let the culture go for 12 hours, maybe till bedtime. If and you'll because you'll start to see it separate into a liquid and more of a solid. Like the liquid will be on the bottom. If that starts to happen, and it's okay to have that happen a few times, or it's okay. And that's actually even okay to drink and have. It's just separate. I think it's like whey. It's similar to whey and curds essentially, but they don't call it that with this particular culture. Um, but I would just put it in the refrigerator. I think it prefers to be more yogurt-like than it. I think it puts a lot of strain. Once it separates, that means it's basically eating all of the. I think it's like a sugar, a type of sugar that the grains feed on, has the fermenting process in the milk. But yeah, throw it in the refrigerator. It will slow it down. Again, if you're going to not, if you like, let's say you're going to go on vacation, I would feed the culture, and instead of leaving it out, I just put it right in the refrigerator. It will continue to ferment, even if it's cooler like that, but it will slow it down quite a bit. Over time, the grains will grow if you're doing it right. And you'll learn how to like work with your grains and treat them right. But as they grow, you're going to start having a balance between uh, how you're going to ferment. So you're either going to have to increase the amount of milk, or you're going to have to, um, or you're going to have to break apart the grain into a piece like let's say two pieces, and discard one or start another culture. It sort of depends on how much milk you want to turn into kefir, um, but it's sort of a balancing act too. The longer it ferments, the more sour it's going to get. So again, like I've done a couple times where I forget about it for a day or two, which is not good for the grains. But it gets really sour, and again, it separates. Um, if you let it go really long, you'll get a huge separation where you get a good chunk. It depends on how much liquid you use, but you'll get like this fluffy semi. It's not solid, but it's not quite cheese like. I wouldn't know how to explain it, but it's really sour. And it smells like cheese. So just be aware of all that. It's edible. Um, I would not eat any. Have you ever seen any sort of mold on it, especially black mold, red mold? Definitely get rid of it. I get rid of mine even if it has blue mold. I've never seen white mold on it before, like a blue green mold, and I've never seen a white mold. Those are apparently, and I do. Well, we'll talk about that in other other things. But if you have any mold on it, just get rid of it. Maybe try to save the grains because they usually are at the bottom and try again, or just start fresh with new grains. And then one thing just to remember, as the grains grow, sometimes they break apart naturally, which I showed you in the demonstration. This is okay as long as they're continuing to grow in size. Again, over the summer, mine were breaking apart and getting smaller, but the ones I just showed you have been broke apart because they're getting bigger. They actually started as just little specks. That grain that you saw started as just like a little speck, and it's grown. So just be aware of this because if you're doing what I was doing, where you're not straining it, you might miss some of the grain, and if you wanted to see, like put it into your fresh culture to keep it growing, you might just want to just be aware of all that. So I hope this was helpful. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll have some more episodes here in the coming days. And thanks again. Good luck.